My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Go Cloud Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the GloCloud team.
Welcome, everyone. Mark Milovanovic to my right over here now, and I are here to answer any questions you have to help you in your technology career. My name is Michael Gibbs. I'm the founder and CEO of Go Cloud Careers. If you don't know me, I've been an IT architect, like a network architect, cloud architect, enterprise architect, business architect for the last 25 years. And my favorite thing, honestly, is just architecture careers and helping people get there. But I've spent 2 years training people for technology careers, architecture careers, engineering careers, and I just want to help you get to your goals quickly. So if you've got some questions, bring your questions and we'll answer them because we want to help you in your career. Before Mark and I begin, I've got a couple of things that I'm pretty excited to announce. The first one is, well, I'll save the best for last. Well, they're all pretty great. So I wanted you to sign up for the How to Become a Cloud Architect email guide. A lot of people come to us for cloud architecture training, or at least how to find a job, or both. And in this ebook that we wrote for you, we will cover every aspect of the cloud architect job and the solutions architect job, what we do, the things that we actually do versus the things people think we do. And quite honestly, that's so important because I've worked with people that have spent years learning those skills for someone else's job. So what we actually do, we'll talk about what hiring managers actually desire and how you can even bypass the hiring managers, go straight to the, bypass the recruiters and go straight to the hiring manager. So there's that. Now, the next thing that I wanted to tell you about is that David Lithicum and I are going to host a webinar tomorrow on how to become an artificial intelligence architect. I always do these with David because he's the leader of our training program. And honestly, the first AI system I worked on was in 2001. It was for a bank. And David's been working with AI systems since the mid 80s. So, I always bring him on there because he knows a lot more about it than me. And he about AI. So he'll come tomorrow and we'll talk about how to become an AI architect, all the skills that we have, all that we do. And of course, it's a free session. It'll be on Zoom. And you can ask David Lithicum and I any questions you want about your technology career in cloud computing, outside cloud computing. We've done pretty much all the roles between David and I. And here's something. Would you like to learn about some cybersecurity? So Mark Milovanovic and I are going to run a completely free 2-week CCSP boot camp. That cloud. Actually, I'll let you go through the acronyms because I remembered as CCIE or CCSP in my head, and of course CISSP, and they're both from the ISC2. And this is one of the most sophisticated cloud security certifications that are out there. It's part of the big three. The big three is the CISSP, the CISM, and the CCSP. This is a internationally recognized certification. It is a professional level certification. And the things that we will cover in this course will work on all clouds. And it is the Certified Cloud Security Professional. But super excited about it, and super excited to be teaching it with Mark. So we'll both cover various sides of it. You know, I know a lot about various forms of security, and I've worked with lots of security and trained many security architects that work all over the world. Mark gets pretty deep when necessary and pretty geeky when necessary in various forms of networking security and also zero trust. So I always feel good when Mark helps me do these things. So Mark, you want to say anything about this session?
Wow, what can I say? It's hard to follow up. I feel like a kid in a candy store now. I hope everybody feels that way too. As Mike mentioned, this is one of our highlights in the week, to be able to come before you, all of you, to be able to join us to answer your career questions, to a certain extent also some technical questions. I know sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to answer in the depth that is necessary on a platform like this. But like Mike said, it's what exciting news it has been being able to give you guys the news about the Certified Cloud Security Professional exam from the ISC2. I think everybody's going to enjoy the heck out of that particular examination because of how applicable it is to all the different cloud vendors. And the nice thing about a certification like that one is, aside from eventually being able to pass it, is that it teaches you good security practices. And as we know, security is and has been for years the hot topic with the recent outages and different attacks that we've witnessed. It's become, again, at the forefront of what an IT professional should be looking at. So we're very excited to be able to bring that to everybody. And I know Mike and I, we've already discussed it. We're actually quite curious to see what type of questions everybody will come up with in response to the actual content that was delivered. But anyway, I regress. We're going to have enough time during that particular bootcamp to discuss the details. And with that, Mike, are you ready to go answer some questions?
I'm always ready to answer questions.
Okay, fantastic. Let's get started with the first question here. We got a question from Flying Kites. Looks like they got an AWS practitioner, AWS DevOps, SysOps, developer, and a solution architect associate certification, and had multiple interviews, and they keep talking about things deeper than they know. How do I get better at these things?
So Flying Kites, I can and will definitely love to help you. The first question I have is, what kind of interviews are you going on? Are they cloud architect or solution architect interviews? Are they cloud engineering interviews? Are they DevOps engineer interviews? Because that's the first thing that I need to know. And the next thing that I need to know is, what kinds of questions? Is it that they're coming in? Well, actually, tell me the job first, and then after that, that you're desiring the cloud engineer versus the cloud architect, whatever interview's been going on. And then after that, I'll get a little deeper on the skills you would need for those jobs to try to direct the questions. I was going to ask you the questions first in the chat box, but given that the chat box is a little tough, if I know if it's an engineering job versus an architect job, I can question, are these the kind of questions they're asking you? And you can say yes or no.
Just the top of my head too, Mike, I think you'll agree there's multiple reasons why that might particularly happen. But it looks like they're saying this is coming from a cloud engineering role. Okay, so Flying Kites. So there's first thing that I'm going to tell you in general, and then afterwards I'm going to get a little more specific. In fact, I'm going to get more specific and ask you several questions right now, and then I'm going to give the answers in general. And the reason I'm going to do that is follows. There's a delay of about 90 seconds on YouTube from the time you see it versus not. So if I ask the questions first, by the time you see the questions and you respond, hopefully you'll have had an opportunity to listen to the first part of what we're actually describing. So let's talk about the questions I have for you. Are the questions becoming fairly deep questions, or things that seem fairly deep to you in, say, networking? Are the questions deep Linux questions that they're asking you? Where they may be talking about how the kernel works, for example. You can just say yes or no if these are the kind of questions that you're actually struggling with. Are these getting into, Terraform and infrastructure as code? Are they asking questions about, a schema, for an example, in a database?
Tell me yes if these are types of the questions they're actually asking you, or no if they're actually not. Because I have a feeling I know what they're asking you versus what you've trained. So now, Flying Kites, let's talk about the cloud engineer role. And let's talk about all the things that you would need to know to be good at a cloud engineer role. Now, first thing we remember is a cloud engineer is a builder. And the cloud engineer also needs to have a deep understanding of how things work. And when you finish all the 5 AWS certifications that you just told me, you will not know how any of the technology works. So the problem is, how do you troubleshoot, and you're constantly troubleshooting in engineering, something that you don't understand? It becomes near impossible. And if you're a cloud engineer, it's not going to be like you just passed your AWS certification. It's not going to look like that. In 98% of customers, enterprise-wise, there's going to be 2 or more clouds, which means you're going to have to be able to configure things across the clouds. You're going to be installing applications and monitoring these systems, which means really deep knowledge on Linux. I like to say that the Red Hat certified engineer is kind of the minimum level of Linux of somebody that I would need those level of skills to hire as a cloud engineer. Now, if I'm going to hire an engineer, especially when AI can do a lot of what engineering does, I need my engineer to be good. So I need to have really strong Python skills because they're going to have to automate a lot of things. And that means it's got to be better than, say, a Claude 3.5 could write for them. Same thing for Bash shell scripting, Windows PowerShell scripting. I need somebody that understands these systems. So we can talk about that in a minute. And yes, that's the kind of questions you're asking. I figured. So the next thing that you're really going to need to understand is, CPU architecture and DRAM architecture and actual network architecture. And at least in terms of when you're dealing with a server, because you can't pick a server based on some manufacturing marketing letter like a C or an I series. You're going to have to look at the type of processors that are going to be in there. For example, the Xeon doesn't perform as well as the AMD EPYC core per core. And but then again, could it be an ARM workload? But you can't figure this out unless you understand that it as an engineer, you're going to be performance tuning. So what you need to do is as follows. What you did with the AWS training is great. And that's why it's landing you interviews. But there's nothing in any AWS certification that's ever going to be good enough for you to get hired on just the basis of AWS certification. But you're going to get this role. You just have to do it right. There are an enormous amount of jobs that are actually out there, but it's near impossible for me as an employer to actually interview someone and hire them. I mean, you can interview 1,000 people and you still can't find the skills. And if you do these skills, nobody's going to care about your lack of experience and it'll never get there. So what I would do if I was you is I would actually do the following. Either get good cloud engineering training, which is generally what I would recommend, because probably what you'll pay in training is less than what you would actually lose in terms of earnings trying to do it yourself. I don't provide cloud engineering training. We're exclusively architects here, but at least that's something for you to think about. And if you're not going to do that, I would go out there and buy the books from Red Hat Enterprise Linux, those Red Hat certified engineer things, and I would learn Linux. And I would set up a machine in my house and I'd make it all Linux. I'd install everything from the command line each day. I'd create virtual machines inside of this Linux box. And then I'd wipe that Linux off and I'd build an OpenStack cloud on it. So you have your own cloud running on your own machine in your own house and you can see what that feels like. And I'd put up a virtual machine and put in Windows Server in there and kind of get hands-on experience. And you don't need all these certifications, but you need the knowledge that you would have gained. So read through the Microsoft documentation as if you were going to be like one of the systems engineers that does systems administration on them. And then you'll know Windows and Linux, which is going to be a big part of it. And then after that, learn some networking. You can take that same system you bought. You can install a networking simulator like EVE-NG. You can basically run Cisco routers directly on that same thing, which you can do on your same system. And really get used to building out these networks. And while you're building out these networks, also learn about networking. Read the book from Bassam Halabi on internet routing architectures. Read some books on, that should get you BGP. Maybe do take our free CCNA training and get some free hands-on networking and then go build some networks on your own. Now, architects, don't need to get hands-on. We need to know how the parts work and how they design, but engineers are going to be hands-on. And when you're on cloud, but you're going to build, start playing with Terraform and build these things. And then you're going to be good, because at this point, most things are going to be infrastructure as code. Now, if you add a little bit, add some additional DevOps knowledge. Get off the cloud. Learn these DevOps tools. Learn what these DevOps pipelines are. And kind of focus on that. So these are the skills you'll need as a cloud engineer. And you need to be really good as an engineer. And, that's one of the reasons, I typically avoid engineering careers now, is because you got to be better than the AI, and you got to keep staying better than the AI. Whereas with architecture, everything we do is human to human, and we can't be replaced by AI. But the point is this: if you love engineering, and Mark was a great engineer for a long time and loved it, I think it's great. Just keep care of that, because your employers care less about your projects. They don't really care about your projects at all. Your employers care about what you can do for them. They care about your attitude, your energy, your enthusiasm, your passion, how well you get along with others, how likable you are, your emotional intelligence, your motivation. So get these skills, go in that next interview, and you'll actually have the knowledge. Because what you're going to do is you're going to learn when you do that engineer level Linux. You're going to learn things. It's going to talk about the kernel and how the kernel, for example, manages memory, and how, schedule processes on the task of the CPU, and how that kernel connects the hardware to the software, and give you all that you need, and where the device drivers sit in the kernel. And then you're going to start to understand these technologies. And when your fundamentals are strong, everything will be so easy for you.
I think I'm going to give you this perspective, Flying Kites, because there's many nuances that could definitely play a factor into it. The one that I will definitely tell you first, if you're going to go for an engineering role, you are expected to understand specific details. So you can't compare it to the details, let's say, that an architect would be expected to know. Architects are generally a mile wide, an inch deep, and only go further if it is required for something. And that is because they have to deal with the entire business acumen side. So you don't have a lot of room to get that geeky, even though Mike and I, we still try to do it as much as we can because we're excited, but you have to be realistic in that. And many people know that. But what I tell people is this: you have enough certifications, let's put it that way. But depending on how you position yourself on that resume, that's going to tell a story about what you want the recruiter or the hiring manager to know. So how you actually format and what you focus on in that resume will at a large part dictate what that interviewer is going to converse with you. So if you position yourself as having these wide spectrum certifications, and you now put yourself in the position of that hiring manager or the recruiter, the one that's actually doing the interview, what would they focus on? There's so much to focus on. And when people don't have a clear direction on things, they don't know what to look at, guess what? They'll go back to whatever they know, whatever they feel comfortable with. And that can actually throw you off your game during that interview process. So I would definitely suggest, if you find yourself on an engineering interview and it's going south quickly, look at your resume. Structure it in a way that tells the story that you want the hiring manager to know about you. And then during the interview, you can elaborate on it, on how your skill set is going to help them reach their mission objectives. Because during that interview, it is your job to help them understand how you fit into the actual group themselves. And that's where the resume can be also a very strong point. The other thing that you can do from another perspective is as well, research what some of these positions actually entail. And the reason I say that is, and we've had this conversation many times on these live streams as well, is a job description is literally a wish list. And you're hoping that whoever put that wish list together got anywhere close to what they're actually looking for. Don't be surprised of the copy and the paste that we see so many times happening with job descriptions. If you're unclear on how you can translate what you have done in the past, what you're currently doing, and your skill set, it might be advantageous also to look at other similar positions and see what they focus on. See what is important to the hiring managers for a particular role like that. And then focus on maybe 3 to 4 points, 5 at maximum if you qualify for them, and really put your heart and soul into that when it comes to your resume writing. That way, there's absolutely no mistake as to what you want to do, what you can do, and then elaborate on how you can accomplish these things compared to the mission objective that the hiring manager and that organization has. And then, of course, there's the entire idea also of how you would respond to the things you don't know about. There's a way to respond to that. But be sure, first of all, to prepare and then provide them with a path on how to lead the interview. Because believe it or not, unless you've actually sat in a seat and having to interview somebody, interviewing is difficult. It is a skill that has to be developed. So the easier you can make it for the recruiter, the better your chances are going to be, or for the hiring manager, the better your chances are going to be of actually being considered for that role itself. So a few little nuggets here and there, but start with telling the story that you want them to know and how that actually is applicable to the mission objective of the company. The next question is from 2N Hughes. Hey, Mike, I don't have any tech background, but I like to change careers into some kind of architect career. I'm not sure what to do, and it doesn't seem easy. What should I do?
So here's the good news. You can definitely do it. I went from internal medicine to tech. So the answer is yes, you should do it. And I will tell you that it's completely feasible. It's completely doable. I will give you some other examples right now, but I'm also going to tell you it's going to take work. Anytime you try to achieve something big, it's going to take work. The reason that a cloud architect or an enterprise architect or an AI architect typically earns as much, if not more, than a physician or a lawyer is because you have to know something and because we provide a skill that society deems is pretty valuable. But there are plenty of opportunities for you. And the key is just being great. So I'll give you examples, and I'll tell you, if you're out there and all you've done is an AWS certification, what I'm going to give 2N Hughes is going to be what you actually need to do to actually get by. So let's say it's architecture. And I love cloud architecture. First, I'd say please download that free ebook on how to become a cloud architect, because it's going to list every single skill that you need. But I'm going to give you insight into it right now versus what we do as architects and the skills that we need. And I'll show you where people go wrong. So what the key is to build any career is you have to know what you know now. You have to look at what do I need to know for the career. You have to do a gap analysis, which is this is what I need to know. This is what I do know. Fill in all those gaps, and then you're ready to go interview. If you go interview before you fill in all these gaps, it's just not going to work. You won't even know what to put on your resume. But that's another story here nor there. So let's talk about what we do as architects. And then we're going to get into the skills that we need. So as an architect, we go ask a client about the vision for their business. Now that means learning their executives, and the organizational chart, the key business processes that are existing in that business, because we can't change the tech without understanding that. So that's the key. The first thing is the vision of the business, and then it's the business architecture. For example, how is a product made? If there's a product, how does that product get serviced? If there is a product, what does that supply chain look like, and all the systems that it needs to touch, and humans that it needs to touch, and work processes to go from point A, which is raw materials, to final product design. What type of people and technologies are actually going on there, for example. Again, totally good to go. So that's what we need to do. First, understand the business vision and also understand business, and then also help the business plan the way it wants to operate in the future. Then we're going to bring in a team of people. Well, actually, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to evaluate their technology, which typically means us building a team, selling people to work on our team, and then that team will spend the next 6 to 12 months analyzing the client's technology, which means we need a lot of planning skills and a lot of leadership skills to do that. Then after that, when we finally figure out what the client's current technology platforms look like, the 200, 300, 400 vendors they have, what systems are talking to what systems, how the systems actually work, how they're working with the business or not working with the business, that we've got to figure out. Now, the next thing we need to do is go back and say business vision, business goals, business pain points, business challenges. new business processes. Does our current tech platform get us to our future business needs? And if the answer to that is no, then we got to go create a new architecture team. And if you're a cloud architect, that might mean a network architect, a security architect, an AI architect, a what do you call it? An IAM architect as well, a DevOps architect you're going to bring in, a data scientist you're going to bring in, a cloud engineer, or a network engineer, because you're going to need some of the expertise of the engineers to get really deep on the techie side of this. And your architects are going to be focusing on the business side of this. So then there's that. And then after we do that, we've got to document this thing. We've got to go back to the client. We've got to get their feedback on it from their key stakeholders. We've got to tune the architecture, present it back. At some point, we have to determine if that organization has the sophistication and capability to change. And if so, do they have the right people? If they do not, do they need to hire people? Do they need to cross-train the people they have? Then we need to figure out what kind of a timeline that it would need for the people to actually go build these systems, because architects don't actually build these systems. Then we've got to go with the account manager and sales team to go sell and negotiate the business deal. And then pretty much we're off to the new client in most cases. So why did I tell you that? The reason I told you that is when I told you that if I say you need to understand business, you'll now understand why. Because you can't optimize a business you don't understand. You can't architect business processes if you don't understand business and business processes. So then the next kind of thing would come in is, you're going to have to build these teams and lead these teams for 6 to 12 months. And, really smart people in these teams, they're going to be like cats. They're all smart and they're all independent, going in their own direction. So they call it cat herding, and you've got to be really good at cat herding. And here's the secret to cat herding. Make the cats want to come to you, because you can't tell a cat to do something else. And that means bringing one person their green M&Ms each day and taking somebody else out for scotch after work that night. And I am not joking. But anyway, it takes that emotional intelligence, because sometimes when you're on a project, things get stressful, and you've got to be the counselor to the team. So there's that. So we're going to give presentations constantly. As architects, you're going to need strong presentation skills. We have to actually create a business case and show the value of the technology solution to the organization's business, and we have to quantify that. So that means we need some finance skills, which go more under business acumen skills. We have to help negotiate deals, so we need some negotiation skills. That is on the tech side. Now, the other thing, we have to remember that architects are not engineers. I love engineers. We are planners. Engineers are builders. We need both. Somebody has to take our architecture plans and turn it into something real. And that's just like when you have a hotel to be designed, you call an architect to design it, and they make a pretty model with a bunch of pretty pools, and then poof, an engineer actually goes and builds it. Or a construction crew. Same thing happens here. Architects design it, cloud engineers, DevOps engineers, developers, they kind of go build this thing. So please understand that. So for architects, you need to understand how the technology works, which is not how do you configure the technology. Most people confuse this all of the time. How to configure technology is me going to a Red Hat box, entering and typing LS to list and see what files are in my thing. That's no big deal. That's hands-on. Now, I could do that all day. I can even type the command TOP on it and see what's going on processes-wise on my system. And I can know how to pipe, and I can know how to grep. But you know what I won't understand? What's the architecture of that actual system? Meaning it's got a CPU. Does it have one CPU or two CPUs on the die, in sockets in the system? And what does that mean in terms of performance? Do I need a CPU with less cores and higher frequencies because I've got single-threaded applications? Or do I have a multi-threaded application which needs more cores even if each core is slower? How many cores do I need to do this processing? What kind of traffic do we have? And would that processor benefit more with a bigger level 1, level 2, and level 3 cache? And how does that impact performance? Now do I need clock rate and cores, or do I need PCIe lanes for GPUs? And that's why I'm saying you can go hands-on all day and you'll never learn architecture. So you're going to have someone like we do teach you the underlying technology of the network. How does it work versus how to configure it? How do these protocols work? You will have somebody need to teach you the data center. And why the data center? Because cloud computing is a virtual data center. But if you don't understand storage area networks and you don't understand storage performance, which you won't get out of a certification, you'll never be able to make it work. If you don't really understand networking, you'll think you can put all your systems on one cloud, and you won't understand why you can't do it from a high availability perspective. If you don't go and learn security, and I mean real security, then you're not going to be in a position to understand how do you design a client's demilitarized zone for remote access versus a different demilitarized zone for web access versus what kind of end-to-end encryption strategy should they have or security policy. So you're going to know about a fair amount about security. You're going to have to understand the types of applications businesses use to optimize their performance. What does an ERP system have? Well, how does that integrate into their organization versus a CRM system? Why and where would that organization use various forms of unified communication systems and expert systems, and what can they cleanify it? Does that organization need agentic AI, or do they need an LLM? Or what do they need? What's going to get them to their goals? So you'll need to understand some AI. Why don't you join us on that completely free, webinar we have, and we'll do it. But you can do it. I mean, I'm telling you, I see it all the time. Jennifer Ema was a mental health tech before we trained her, and her first job was at JP Morgan Chase. Daniel Bosu was 20 years old. He didn't even graduate college or even high school, actually, and JP Morgan Chase hired him. He was really great. Jeffrey West, again, was somebody that didn't have a tech background. We trained him, got him hired at Kalian. Balwinder Kerr was a stay-at-home mom. We trained her and got her straight hired at Microsoft as a cloud solution architect. Well, Sagana was a sales rep hired by, JP Morgan Chase as an enterprise architect. While we're at it, Al Legister was in sales. Kimberly Clark, we trained him and got him hired as a senior solutions architect at Deloitte. So the answer is you can do it. And I've got examples all day long of people that have done it. Or Ivan Tamba that was working as a waiter who got hired by AWS as a solution architect. You can do it. And I strongly encourage you to do it. Find a job you love and go run after it. Will it be hard? Yeah. But if you don't do what you love, you have a lifetime of regret. If you do what you love, you say, well, that was a hard 8 months, 9 months of my life, year of my life, but look at the rewards I've gleaned today. So that's my advice for you. Mark, I know you didn't come from tech either, but you became in tech, kind of like me. I came from healthcare.
Oh, yeah, I have. I'm trying to contain my thoughts on this. So I'm going to focus on one aspect, but I wanted to just briefly touch as well on what you mentioned at the end. It's not going to be easy. I always say anything that's worth doing is going to be difficult. And the nice thing is when you go the extra mile, that lane of the extra mile is generally quite empty. So you're going to have less competition. So if you need fuel, you need motivation as to why you should work hard and smart. Just remember, there's not many people that are willing to go that extra mile that you're willing to go. But the other thing I wanted to briefly touch on, because I've seen this happen quite often, and people get this misconception. They see individuals like myself, like Mike, and they see other architects and even engineers. And what they notice is that there's a lot of that educational aspect in the videos, in the documentation that comes across. And what I want people to know is that as an actual architect, it is not your responsibility to educate. You're not there to teach them every minutia about the solution, about a particular platform. If you're within software, you're not there to teach them what every minute click of the button does. That's not your job. Your job is something very important, and that is to be an unbiased, trusted advisor. I know that sounds like a hype word, but that's really what you are. You are there to advise them on how you can map a technology, and that technology being part of a solution to a particular business need, which could be a problem that needs to be solved that the business requires. So your focus is not on education, which you see many of us do, but rather on proving value. That is actually the first thing, because if you cannot prove value of what you're suggesting, you will never get that budget. You will never even get out of the shoe, as they say. You will not be able to put your team together. You will not even be able to think about which vendor you need to contact. None of that will matter unless you can prove value for the solution that you're suggesting. So I don't want anyone to get hung up when you see a lot of people doing the education side. I can tell you, coming from the engineering side as well, it is something that naturally grows as you learn certain things, that you just want to help others do it. You want to show them how it works. But as an architect, it is more about telling them what they're getting out of it compared to always showing them what they're going to get out of it. The outcome, the result will speak for itself. That's the eventual show. So just be aware of that. Not going to be easy, and focus on what the role actually is. And that is to prove and provide value to your customers, which are going to view you as a trusted confidant, somebody that is not biased, but wants to do what is best for business. So I just wanted to point that out.
Chris, let's take one question out of order because I'm really concerned about it. And it's the question where we had someone that was actually talking about their cloud engineering interview. And then someone else actually asked about the questions for the cloud architect interview, because I really want to be very specific here, because I want to make sure we protect yourself.
All right. So this is a follow-up to the conversation discussion we had with Flying Kites, as you mentioned. And Yasel is asking, how deep do they go on your interviews? Please don't gatekeep. I'm trying to get ready for interviews myself, mostly cloud solution architect in my case. What are your thoughts, Mike?
Okay. And then the first thing was Flying Kites thankfully responded and said, but I wanted to make sure she knew the difference between an architect and everybody did, and an engineer. And Flying Kites said, for my engineering interviews, they asked me about database schemas. That's exactly what I would assume they would ask you. Automating Linux servers, things like cron tab. Absolutely, they're going to ask you things like that. About storage and how it worked. I would definitely ask you that, because I'm more concerned that you understand how the technology works than anything. Because if you understand object storage, and you're a cloud engineer, and you can work with it in my data center, you can work with it on Azure. They may call it blah, but you still understand object storage. You can work with it on Google Cloud Storage or AWS. I say it's the same tech. And at an admin level, I care if you click buttons. But at an engineering level, I care if you know it. So that makes sense. And they asked you about Active Directory. Yes, because the identity and access management strategy we're going to be using is either going to be some Active Directory server that we even keep on the cloud, whether it's theirs or ours, whether we keep it in our data center, or we're doing some kind of federated thing with the Azure Cloud version, entry ID, which is, again, Active Directory with a new name. So yeah, that would be exactly what I'd be looking for. So there's that. And why do I say this to Yasel? Let's bring Yasel's questions back up. Because I would never ask people those types of questions on a cloud engineering interview. They're specific to cloud engineers. Now, here's the kind of thing I would ask you in a cloud architect interview, and I really would. I might ask you, given that the world is 98% multi-cloud, what would you do? What are the principles and guidelines that you would need to do to create a multi-cloud architecture with simplicity and elegance? And I'd be looking to see your rationale. Or would you say, what level of availability do you need? And if I'd say 5 nines, the first thing that I would want you to start thinking of is, okay, not only do we need more than one cloud, we're going to need 2 data centers on each cloud at bare minimum. So 2 availability zones, 2 cloud providers. And then I would immediately be thinking, okay, what kind of DNS can we use? Well, we can't use just an AWS DNS, or we can't just use an Azure DNS. We're going to have some form of high availability DNS that's in 2 clouds in case each cloud fails. And then those are the kind of thinking, the thoughts that I'd want you to start looking for. And then, okay, well, if we have 2 clouds, we can't use anything proprietary like an Azure Cosmos DB or an AWS DynamoDB. We can't use half of these proprietary services. Okay, boom. So I'd want you to think about what the replacements would be, like a MongoDB or an Apache Cassandra. Would you know to use Apache Cassandra if you've got more write load versus MongoDB is going to be better when there's more read load? That's the kind of architectural design considerations, kind of things, for example, I want to know that's in your head. I want to know that you know how to work around the cloud storage latency issues, because it's very slow in the cloud versus what it is in the data center. And I might go and ask questions about that. Talk to me about data center storage performance versus cloud storage performance and what you could do. Those would be the kind of things I might ask. I might also ask about transitive routing as it pertains to what do you call it, VPC peering. I might ask you how to design your demilitarized zone for your web application. I might ask you about an organization's weighted average cost of capital and how that pertains with building a private cloud versus a public cloud versus a multi-cloud from a financial metric basis. I might ask you to explain, What kind of databases does a business typically have, and why do they have these databases? What business value are they getting? I might ask you about data lakes and what goes into the designing of a data lake. All these are solution architect questions. So those would be the kind of things I would ask you. And the reason I called it out is I really, really want to help you. And I don't want people confusing engineering questions with architecture questions. I might even ask you about a time that you worked with a client and they were unhappy in the past because they had bought something and they weren't getting benefit, which is the case of 70% of customers after they bought a technology product. I might ask you about the kinds of presentations and where you've done it and the type of audiences that you've done. Those are solution architect, cloud architect type questions. I hope that helps. I just wanted to take that out of order because when we confuse engineering and architecture, that's when people spend so many years of their lives learning engineering things for architect jobs. And that's like saying, okay, I learned how to fix the engines on an airplane, but I'm here for the pilot interview. And at the same time, if you've got a smooth, polished executive architect, and now they got to go write software for the business, it's not going to work because they're focused on all these businessy things. So that's why it's all about what you're good at.
So you're telling me, Mike, you don't need to know how the engine is built necessarily to drive the car, correct?
Nope, not at all. Or to fly the plane.
There you go. Yeah, so I'm gonna add a little bit something there for you. If any of you are ever confused in regards to what potential questions you could have, and again, we can't know 100% for sure, but do this. Research the company. See what they do. Understand in what market they're in, who their competition is. Give yourself some insight into what type of business are they running. Then compare it to the actual job description based on the role. And then start thinking, what would be some reasonable questions that an individual could potentially ask me? And how could I align my resume towards these things that they're looking for and that they potentially would ask me? And that way, you're going to get a leg up on a lot of people who are going to sit there, they're going to download a PDF that gives them 101 questions to ask. And then you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I probably need to have some exceptional memory just to remember them all. And then they're not going to come across as genuine anyway because you try to memorize them. So rather, be exactly what they're looking for. And this counts also for engineers. I didn't forget you. But understand what the company is doing. Be curious about it. And ask yourself the questions. What could they ask me? How would they ask me? Why would they ask me? And in your mind as well, come up with questions you would ask them that would help you position yourself in an interview better. Meaning, if you're not really sure what they're doing there, but you need clarification, ask. Think of an open-ended question that you can ask them, because in the end, they also need to sell you on the role. And if they see that you're invested, that you're interested, that you're seeking, that you're searching, you're really trying to have clarity, you'd be surprised how many interviewers are going to want to help you, because it gives them this impression of you, that you're bought in on a mission. And if you're bought in on a mission, even before they take you on, how many people do you have that are willing to do that, are willing to be there, put the best foot forward? So always think about what can you do to put yourself in a more advantageous position. And that is one of those things. Will it take a little work, a little time? Sure. But then again, wouldn't you expect the same when you start that job? It would take some work, take some time. Think about that a little bit and see if that resonates with you and if that makes sense. All right. Shani, so nice to see you join us today.
Sorry.
I had the pleasure of speaking with you the other day. She says, I just joined your Cloud Architect and Gen AI Architect course. So should I focus on the CCSP instead of the CISSP? Or perhaps is it beneficial for both?
Okay, so Shani, I don't know all of what your actual long-term goals are. Generally speaking, I would do the CISSP. So let's look at probably the 3 best certifications for security architects in the entire world right now. We have the CISSP, which has always been number 1. The second is potentially, depending upon where you're working, either the CISM, which is basically designed for security managers, and that focuses on the leadership perspectives of security, which again is something very necessary. More of the financial metrics of security. And you have the CCSP, which is more cloud focused. So if you're in our paid training program, I would continue with the CISSP. I would say that is the number one. And that's one of the special benefits that we actually have for our paid students. I'm doing the CCSP for the following reason. For the most part, it's the absolute second best cybersecurity certification in the world for cloud. If people were to go take a boot camp for an ISC2 professional exam like the CCSP or the CISSP, a real one taught by real people that know it, like Mark and I, it's between $5,000 and $10,000 for that actual boot camp to be taught by somebody that can actually teach you something that understands it and can explain these technologies there. The content from the CCSP will be very helpful for you in your cloud architect career or cloud security architect career, even if you are CISSP certified. Because there are certain things in that CCSP that is not in the actual CISSP, which is another reason I like doing this one. So could you do both? What I would say, if I was only going to get one certification, I would do the CISSP cert because it's a bigger cert, and I would still get the training from the CCSP. But that's kind of like what I did with me. You know, if the CISSP is the king and queen of all the security certifications, and the CCIE is the king and queen of networking certifications, that the CCNP is still highly valuable, helping people get great network engineering jobs. And maybe only 5% of the people in networking even have that. And this is kind of designed to put people in the upper 5% to get those best 5% kind of skills that are out there. And we go from the 5% to the top 1% for the people in our paid training programs. But this is something that I'm very excited to be doing. It is an incredible certification. And I have to tell you, after I actually, and I'll tell you the other reason I'm doing it for everyone, is after creating the content for the CCSP training, I think they have more knowledge on cloud computing than the AWS Solutions Architect Professional in the certification. And if I were to compare the AWS Security to Advanced in terms of security knowledge and the CCSP, well, I'd say it's 50 times the security knowledge in the CCSP versus the AWS one. The AWS Security Advanced was the name of an AWS service used that you could use for security and how to configure it with no security knowledge. In the CCSP, you'll probably learn why you shouldn't use those cloud provider security services and why you should use a more enterprise-grade security service in the first place. And it's more architecture focused, and you're not going to be configuring it anyway, which gives them all the time to talk about that technology. So I love the CCSP. Could you do both? It depends what you want to do. So if you wanted to be a cloud security architect, do both. I highly encourage it. If you wanted to be an AI-focused security architect, where you're focusing on using AI for doing it on the cloud, again, I would do both. If your goal is to be a pure cloud architect at that executive business level, I'd probably, and that's at the point where you don't want to have too many certifications and you want more executive business on you. And that's when I would just do the CISSP. So it's all about where you're at and where you're going. For the average person right now, if they have 3 or 4 certifications and 2 of them were security, a CCSP and a CISSP, and maybe they had 1 cloud certification, that'd be perfect. Or they could have a CISSP and a TOGAF and a cloud provider, perfect. So I think it depends on you and exactly what your goals are and where you want your specialty to be. But I definitely encourage you to definitely do the training from the CCSP. And, you know, maybe Mark will agree with me, even though people think I'm crazy. So I say that the CCIE, the Cisco Certified Internet Expert, was my intro to networking. And here's what I mean by that. Look, it was a miserable 6 to 9 months. I don't think I slept for 9 months straight. I read 500 to 1,000 pages a day, did 1,000 hours of labs for this thing, read every RFP out there. I'm not RFP. RFC, every request for comments on the IETF webpage, read all the Internet of Trip Engine electrical engineering specs for all the WAN technology. I did that. So it was miserable. But when I finally finished it, that was when it was like whoa, now I'm in a big project. I don't know what I don't even know yet. And that's when I had to start learning networking. So if you were going to take that same approach with just getting the CISSP, Yeah, that CISSP is your entry ticket. And then all these other knowledge pieces will build on top of it and make you better. But, you know, you don't need the second certification unless that's your goal. Hope that makes sense.
All right, I'm going to classify it as this way, Mike. He's correct in stating that any type of examination, it doesn't matter if it's certification, license, if you attach generally like the expert phrasing to it, if you've done it right, and I don't mean that you're the best of the best of the best, but if you actually went through the process of doing your very best and learning it, what you find out is how many weaknesses you have. Because when you started, you didn't even know what you didn't know. That's what happened. And then as you went through the process, and with the CCIE, it's in depth. And especially when Mike took it, it was broad because they didn't have the additional CCIE's domains of the security and so forth. It was all sort of packed into one and a little bit of everything. And it becomes an eye-opener because you're taking something that is supposed to make you feel like you're the be-all, end-all, right? You're supposed to be the expert. And yet you come out of it and you're like, my goodness, I feel like a schmuck. There's not this to learn and the other thing to learn. I didn't even know this existed. And then you get on a job. And all of a sudden be like, oh, they don't use DMVPN. They use software-defined networking. What on good earth is that now? I don't remember that being, oh, Cisco has it now, but before they didn't have it. So that's why we call it an intro, because it really teaches you what you didn't know and what you have to get more proficient in to be able to grow in your career and also excel in the workplace. So I just want to let everyone know, it's not easy, right? That's not what we're saying. It's not fundamental because it was easy, but it's an eye-opener. And in your case, Shani, I know that you're doing your very best in trying to grasp the concepts, as we've discussed the other day. And you said something in your comment. You said, what should I focus on? The one thing that you should right now focus on, and then we'll pivot to more specifics of your question, is get comfortable with the fundamentals. Because if you build a good foundation, now you can build on that foundation. If you build with like straw or hay and a fire comes or some water comes, what happens? It gets blown away. But if you build your foundation with cement and you add some iron in between or some steel, right, reinforce it, hey, it doesn't matter if the water comes, it doesn't matter if the fire comes, that foundation is solid. So first, work through the fundamentals of the program. And that's going to include also the GenAI, because the GenAI is also going to build on that foundation. Now, when it comes to your specifics, and I'm going to now get rid of the focus, right? Because you should have a better idea what you should focus on right now. What would you do first? Would you first go with the CISSP, or would you go with the CCSP? Well, as Mike said, the CCSP, which is the Certified Cloud Security Professional, focuses on cloud environments. But what about networking? What about storage? What about physical security, logical security? What about what happens if there's a threat that gets into your network? What happens if there are certain attacks like cross-site scripting, different malware attacks? Are they going to be all specifically covered in the CCSP? Not necessarily, because they may not be just cloud specific. What the CISSP will do for you, it will give you a broad overview of what security should be like across all domains. Now, it won't go into details, maybe such as the CCSP when it comes to the cloud security on how to do that, but it's going to give you an overview. And the reason this is important, and I'm not saying that CISSP is easy, it is difficult. But what it will do is, and you might have heard me say this in class, I'm a big proponent of having a whole picture, so going from the whole to the details. And I always use this analogy of a skeleton, a knowledge skeleton. You first want to build the scaffolding, the structure. And then you want to be able to attach the details to it. That scaffolding, that structure to me is the CISSP when it comes to security, because it touches on so many little things and it starts building context in your brain. Then when you go to something more specific, and this can now mean anything from cloud security, can mean anything from network security, storage security, and so forth. That's where the more specifics come in. So if you did decide down the line that you wanted to get more specialized within the security realm, do your CISSP first, and you have access to the training per hour program, and then focus on the cloud security. And that's going to make it easy also to contextualize and attach that additional knowledge that you're going to gain from the more specifics. I hope that makes sense, Shawnee.
And here's the key, Shawnee. The CCSP is a great curriculum and it'll benefit anyone. It really will. And the reason it will is, even in the CISSP, which I love, it is great, but it doesn't cover as much on the cloud. If you're focused on cloud computing, you need the CCSP knowledge, or at least the things to consider anyway. Whether you do that certification or not, it's still going to be highly beneficial for you.
Yeah, and I think Mike will agree.
Training time.
It's all intertwined anyway. So it doesn't matter if you wanted to be a cloud architect, if you're going to be a network, it doesn't matter, because guess what? Workloads are going to be in the cloud going forward. That's not changing. So you will still have to get good at being able to secure that, because our perimeter changed. It's not anymore local, right? It's spreading out. We're deperimeterizing things. So for either anyone, learning cloud security is going to be paramount. You're not going to get around that. All right, next question is from Parag. People who pass the AWS solution architects are saying that there are no jobs for freshers. What should freshers do?
Well, Parag, there's plenty of jobs for people. But here's but there's no entry-level jobs. You can get a completely high-end job with no experience, but there are no entry-level jobs, and there probably never will be again. And I talked about that, and I was published in every IT magazine you can imagine. And I talked about which jobs were going out of style and which ones were. You can find me in Forbes and HR.com and a whole host of these magazines. So let's talk about what's going on. Entry-level jobs are dead. I no longer need a cloud admin. I no longer need a network admin. I don't need a junior engineer. Here's the reason why. I used to need a whole bunch of admins to do something. But a DevOps engineer, in a matter of 5 minutes with an infrastructure as code script, can do more than 50, cloud admins in a month. So, I don't need those entry-level jobs. The entry-level jobs used to be to go in and to rack and stack servers. Again, I don't need those people anymore because they're in the cloud provider for the same thing. So I'll give you some examples. If you've got the right skills, you don't go for an entry-level job. The most junior level job I had in my life is my first job, which I had for 3 months. I was a senior engineer, and then I was promoted to lead architect inside of 3 months. I never had a junior job. And I can tell you countless people. For example, Ivan Tambo was a waiter before AWS hired him. But I'll tell you what he did to get him trained. I'll tell you that Richard Ferrari. He was someone working in a bank's fraud department, not an IT version, hired as a solution architect when we're done. Noah Parker was a social worker. After we trained him, completely hired by North Highland. I think Vladimir was North Highland. He was a 24-year-old college kid. But Noah Parker was hired by Ahead as a solution architect. So it doesn't matter. Lenny Burnett was our video editor, but he got hired by Citrix as a solution architect. So anybody can, with the right skills, can get any job they want. Now, the key is there's nothing in the AWS solutions architect professional that would get you ready for any job in the entire world. So if you think that you can just become an AWS solutions architect professional and go get the AWS DevOps professional and get a job, that's where people are mistaken. So let's talk about what employers need versus what people think they need. And that all determines that learning the job. If I need a cloud engineer, for example, I don't care about 80% of the stuff that was in that AWS solutions architect professional that you cared. I care that you understand storage. And all right, okay, block storage is slow. What are we going to do about it? What are the RAID versions that we can use? Why are we using RAID? If our application has low performance and you're a cloud engineer, I need you to know why. I saw some person try to post on LinkedIn and they talked about all the things you can do on the application side to improve application performance. And if it's slow, it's that. But they missed the network and they missed the compute and they missed the storage. They missed the entire infrastructure. So I need you to know networking. I need you to know storage. I need you to understand databases. If you're a cloud engineer, I need you to understand Linux and be good at Linux and good at Windows Server. I'm good at Active Directory and good at Python and Bash if you're going to be an engineer. By comparison, if you're an architect, I need you to be able to understand an organization's business needs and business processes. I need you to be able to understand a business's challenge, quantify that financial challenge, and then be able to show that the technology architecture you design is going to cost less that challenge and what value of the business is going to be. If I want you to be a solutions architect, I need to know that you have stakeholder management skills because you're going to have to manage stakeholders, sales skills because you're going to need a sales skill, well, presentation skills because you're going to give presentations every day, leadership skills because you're going to lead a team, executive presence because you're going to walk into the C-suite and they're going to be who buys your product and you're going to have to be taken seriously. And I also need to understand that you know network and data center design. Do you know BGP? Do you understand your IP address and route planning? Do you know how to deal with transitive and non-transitive routing? Do you understand what is that 802.1q thing that you send on a private line when you connect to the cloud? And do you understand what is going on these direct connections? Where are the hops? How do they work? What's the difference between what's going on the routing side? When would I use to route summarization? When would I change my traffic with the wait versus prepending the AS, versus leaking a more specific route? I need to know that you know those kinds of things as an architect. What goes into designing of a data lake? What goes into designing of an AI system? That's architecture stuff, but it's not covered in the solutions architect professional. They're just the name of a service and how to configure that. So Prague, you can get any job you want, but you have to have the skills for the job. I did, try many years ago. I interviewed 1,000 AWS certified people, and here's the reality. Most of them didn't even know what cloud computing was, what a virtual machine was. They knew a lot about AWS services, which is fine, and how to configure those services, but you can't actually design an architecture by learning how to configure. It doesn't teach you architecture. Architecture is how you design it. Architecture is assessing the organization's readiness for change, their culture, their capability for change, that kind of thing. So the answer is there's many, many more jobs than you can possibly imagine out there as cloud architects, enterprise architects, solutions architects, business architects, but you just have to have the right skills and don't plan on getting them from an AWS certification. That's why we do what we do. That's why I interviewed 1,000 AWS certified people and asked them basics of architectures before I created our training. And that's why I let people stay in our training program until they're hired, because it's a big role and it's the best job ever. But yes, there's plenty of opportunities out there. Don't let anybody knock you down. You just need to have the right skills.
Would you say also it's important, Mike, to find a company that will match what you're looking to do? Because sometimes it can be that particular projects that they have might be looking for a particular skill set or level of a skill set for what you're applying to.
Yeah, so it's that. So I'd say it could be work match. It really could. It could also be cultural fit. For example, there's some cultures that everybody's miserable, but they get paid a lot and they stick around until they burn out. There's other cultures that I've worked for where we got paid a little less, but I loved everybody I worked with, and it was like party time every single day of the week. I was there. While I was at the company, they did 11 layoffs while I was there. And obviously I wasn't laid off, but the point is I watched each person go, and the family that was the close team, we were like, we were staying there for each other. None of us wanted to be there, but we loved each other and we loved it so much. We were happy to be there. And then when it's Cisco, and I was like, this is me. And, I stayed there for more than a decade. So all in all, I think you can do anything you want. But you just got to do what you like. So find the cultural fit, find the work fit, because if it's the wrong work for you, you won't be happy. And that's no good either.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. All right. Let's take a look at our next question. It's from Earn Joy. They're asking, is the CCSP for cloud architects?
Is the CCSP for cloud architects? Absolutely. So if we look at our three main security architecture certifications, and there's lots of security architecture certifications, are the following. So the CCSP, Cloud Security Architecture Certification, CISSP, Security Architect Certification / Cloud Security Architect. CCSP is more cloud specific, honestly. And the CISM, which is the Certified Information Security Manager. They're the big three. They're the only three. And but the CCSP is an excellent cloud security, cloud architecture certification. And it's at the architecture level. It is not at a vendor proprietary level. Absolutely not.
Let's put it this way, everyone. If you want to be a cloud architect, we always talk about this opportunity cost idea. You will gain more out of a CCSP than you will potentially get out of an actual solutions architect associates, or even potentially professional degree or examination. And it doesn't matter from what cloud vendor, because it's how the CCSP is actually built out. It's not just teaching you the engineering aspects of it. It's going to take a little step away from that. But what it's really going to focusing on is on how does this stuff work all together? Why is it there? And then how can you leverage it as an architect in coming up with these procedures and way of implementing security based on the strength and the weaknesses that come with the cloud. So there's a lot more to it than what you will see on any of the other type of certifications that we're used for, that are going to be mostly geared toward administrators and depending on that level, the engineers. All right, let's take a look at the next question, please. And that one is from Chris. Welcome, Chris. He's asking, with my data analyst background and recent layoffs, which role, cloud architect, sales engineer, or technical project manager would be easier for career change in this tough job market?
Okay, Chris. So your data analyst background is going to be good for another data analyst job. Having said all of that, you can do any of these things. It's just you're going to need to be trained for them. You know, if a nurse wants to go become a physician, they go to medical school. It doesn't matter how many years they've been a nurse. So let's talk about the opportunities that you have in front of you. So I love cloud architect roles. I love sales engineers roles and technical project managers under times of good economies. Great. Under times of bad economies where projects are slower, bad. So let's talk about the first two. The cloud architect, realistically speaking, is a more business-oriented, more business executive version of the sales engineer. Sales engineer is a little more techie. Sometimes the sales engineers will get hands-on during a proof of concept. The sales engineers typically are a little rougher around the edges with their presentations. And they're allowed to be because they have good knowledge in their head on the technology. The architect is going to be lighter on the technology than the sales engineer, but is going to have better business acumen, typically better leadership skills, better executive presence, those types of things. So I'd ask you, what do you like doing? Now, I'll tell you, I would take the architect role first, the sales engineer second, and I'll tell you why. With every form of new technology that comes around, it creates a new opportunity for an architect and potentially a sales engineer, but I'm going to talk about the architect before I get to the engineer. And the better business skills you have, the better knowledge of the technology and what it can do, the better you are at your job as both a cloud architect and sales engineer, because you're going to be paid effectively in most cases to design, present, and sell a technology solutions. But here's why I'm more focused on the architect side versus the sales engineer side. And I love both of these jobs. And the reason I like both of these jobs is both they are revenue producing and they are customer facing. What does this mean? It means no matter what the economy is like, companies still need to bring money in or revenue in. And the cloud architect, solutions architect, sales engineer, AI architect, they're selling a solution with the account team and they're bringing money in. So in a bad economy, what you do is you get rid of your back end people, like you get rid of your engineers, some of your project managers, and some of the people that are related to that, and you overwork your engineering team. Now your salespeople, you still need them to sell, so you add sales engineers and cloud architects. Now, why architect over engineer? Well, there's a substantial pay difference between the architect and the engineer. And that's coming from the more business acumen, more executive, more leadership skills. As AI gets a little bit better, some of these technical skills can be done by AI. So who does that, does that cut down to some degree of the sales engineer, and why? A little bit, not too badly, a little bit, because you still need these people that can develop relationships. And the sales engineer typically focuses on the customer's techie, where the solution architect typically focuses on the customer's business people. And when you're trying to sell $1 billion solution, I want my sales engineer to get all kinds of geeky with those other engineers on the customer side, because they love that and they make us better. Meanwhile, I'm an architect and I focus on the people that have the power to pay for it and the power to make a decision. Because the engineers can never say, I want to buy this, but they can block you from selling it. So you still need that sales engineer. So if I was going to be a sales engineer, because I like being on the more hands-on techie side, I still look in the world of AI and automation. And then I think, if I'm a sales engineer, can I get better business skills? And yes, it'll make you a better sales engineer. Can I get better leadership skills? Well, yes, you could. Can you get better executive skills and business acumen skills? And yes, you could. And then you have a choice. Do you want to be a $180,000 sales engineer or a $300,000 architect doing the exact same job at that point? Which is why I say the cloud architect, the solutions architect, the AI architect, or the enterprise architect for that reason. But generally speaking, data analyst role, you know what you're prepared for? More data analyst roles. But it doesn't matter what you used to do. Just get great training, Chris. Go learn and be great at it, and then get any job you want. And that's really the secret. I will tell you that last night I was a wild man food-wise. For people that know me, know that I've got some musculoskeletal pain conditions and I have to eat a healthy diet to be okay. So basically I eat chicken and broccoli, lean beef and broccoli, fish and broccoli, giant salads with tuna, turkey, or fish on it, and then eggs and blueberries and other vegetables. That's like my whole diet. But last night I wanted pizza. So they have these Ezekiel muffins you get at the health food store. And I chopped 2 of them, and I chopped some broccoli, and I put some skim cheese on it and some tuna pepperoni, and I was a wild man. I had made little pizzas out of it. And when I woke up, I felt sluggish. So I woke up today, ate a healthy breakfast, went to the gym, and I'm back to normal. Why do I say that? Because it doesn't matter what you used to be. Everything you've done up to today is in the past. Everything your future is, you decide right now by the actions you take and the decisions you make. So go be anything you want and love the opportunity.
Okay, Mike, now you got me hungry. Even though I don't eat half that stuff you just mentioned, you still got me hungry.
Okay. Come to my house. You know what? You know where I live.
Yeah, definitely know. It's not that far away. I was thinking as you were answering this question for Chris, and I'll be honest with you, Chris, it's not necessarily fair for us to tell you what it is that you should be doing. Yeah. Because let's say any of these 3 roles that you touched on, they're going to require some work, some dedication of doing it. And we're big proponents, and I guess this is this aspect of the architects we have in us. We constantly ask for clarification, for additional questions, try to figure out what you want to do, not what you want to do. The first thing I would definitely tell you, what is it that what is it that you want to do? What is it about a cloud architect, about a sales engineer, and a technical product manager that attracts you to these positions? Because we asked that question is, you're looking at this, and this is my assumption. If I'm mistaken, and please correct me. I'll gladly be wrong if that's the case. But as a data analyst, what you're probably doing is you're trying to simply look at what your skill set is and how do you map it over. And that's the techie in you thinking of that. Mm-hmm. And any of the roles that you just described, yes, they have technology in them, but they're not at the core technology jobs. So you would have to really take a look and see if that's something you want to do. You want to do cloud architect, you want to do sales engineer. And by the way, sales engineers are also sometimes called solution architects. It's just a different title for the same role. you have to be ready to face and work with people and with customers. If that is not something you want to do, guess what? Those two first roles are a hard pass. And I don't want you to hard pass. That's why think about it, exactly what you want to do. It's very rewarding, both of those careers. Now, when it comes to a technical project manager, that's a bit of a different ball game. Are you good at being organizational leadership? Are you good at that? Being able to drive the team, put things together. It's going to be a little bit different than the other two roles. So you have to ask yourself, is that something that appeals to you? If it does not, that may not be something that you want to initially consider. But in either case, number one, what is it that you want to do? And then ask yourself why. And that's going to drive you a little bit more. If you really don't have it, Mike made the great suggestion, start diving a little bit into each role. What are the roles about? What do people say about them? Money aside, right? Don't consider money. Money is great, right? You can make $500,000 here. You can make $250,000. Those are great. But if you're going to be miserable doing it, that money don't matter at that point, right? So put the money right now aside, have it somewhere in the ether, thinking as a motivation. But ask yourself, what is it really you want to do? Mm-hmm. All right, let's go on to the next question, please. And this is from Mohammed. Welcome back, Mohammed. He's asking, I'm assuming he's probably asking about, will the CCSP cover security aspects such as cloud as general and also management?
Okay, so I know Mohammed, he's super smart. So let me talk about the two things. We will cover, for the most part, all aspects of cloud security to some degree. General management depends on what your consideration is of management. So if you're talking about creating the security policies and the security teams and managing of incident responses and things like that, yeah, we're going to cover that. If you're talking about how to configure things, that is not part of the CCSP curriculum. This is an architecture certification from the ISC2. And that's the reason why it focuses on architecture versus engineering. But you will learn a lot, Mohammed. And I know you, and I know you try to get access to what you want. And this is going to be pretty significant for you. So I really hope to see you there, Mohammed. Invite some of your friends and neighbors, too, that want to join as well.
Yeah, so for everybody, so that they understand, most of this ICS2, so that's the consortium that actually spearheads these type of examination, they're really big on being vendor agnostic, number one.
Yes.
So that is always great for us. We like to be vendor agnostics. It provides us with this flexibility of being able to work with different platforms for different vendors. So that's always good for us. But what they're really focusing on is not the actual implementation pieces within a particular domain. They really want you to have an overall understanding of the topic or of the domain that you're covering. So in this case, it would be the cloud security. And with that, naturally, what's going to come? You're going to have to learn what it is, how does it work, and then the one crucial piece that is often not covered in other ones, and that is, what about the legal requirements? What about the procedures? How do those play a factor in? So you can slowly see that shift. We're not talking about engineering the details on how to make things work. Rather, how do you set up the policies for an entire organization that uses these services? What happens? What is the game plan if something goes wrong? What do we do? So it definitely will cover general cloud security and some specifics, and especially the management aspects of it, because that's really going to make you unique when you go into the workforce and you do apply for these roles. Yeah. Okay, and the question is from Foolish the Crow. Hi, Mike. He's asking how you're doing. And is it not having a college degree a serious hindrance to getting hired? Do I have to overcompensate for not having my degree yet?
So Foolish the Crow, if you would have asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have said it would be a big downside to your career not to have a college degree. Recently, universities have not been producing graduates that have the skills for most jobs that are out there. They are being taught things in school, but not necessarily the things that employers are desiring. And as such, most employers at this point, especially the biggest employers, said degrees are no longer required for the majority of our jobs. This is companies like Microsoft, companies like Google. They just don't care anymore. What they're looking for is someone that can actually do the job. So here's what we used to think about someone in college. We used to think that college was a big pain in the whatever. And it used to be harder to get to pass, but it used to be this grueling thing that, oh my God, you got to do it for 4 years. You got a bunch of people telling you silly things to do. And then it was kind of like, seriously? Are you going to be willing to put up with it? And that was one of the things we loved out of people that went to college. They wanted to learn healthcare, and they're taking 18 million courses on English literature and statistics and calculus and things that have actually nothing to do with their actual job. But they stuck through it, and they got through it, and they were willing to learn. That's something we typically like out of somebody out of college. The next thing we typically like out of someone out of college was, because you have to go read a lot in college, or at least you used to, you have the ability to read and read well. Sounds silly, but you're not going to get your deep information, design, and architecture out of a YouTube video or an Instagram video. You're going to have to read deep technology knowledge and have a deep understanding. And you can't just go to ChatGPT. So they're hoping you know how to read and not just how to read Foolish the Crow. When you go through an educational program, they tell you where to go. You don't go to somebody's little personal blog to get information. You go to a peer-reviewed journal, or you go to an official publication that's been written by experts that have been hand-selected to do it. So, there is that. And that's why when I teach or David Lithicum teach, we don't teach like the rest of the people, because we've actually done this. We've been experts on these things for decades. It's not like something we learned yesterday and we're now teaching people about on our blog. So there's that. So those are the things you learned in school. You also, typically speaking, when you go to school with people that are a whole lot different than you. There's this interesting cuckoo group and this interesting cuckoo group and this interesting cuckoo group, and it's all the cuckoo groups that's find a way to kind of get along. And that's, again, a very valuable skill for life, because thankfully we're all different, and that's what's special about us. And if anybody saw my hobbies, they would think I was an equal cuckoo, or if they saw the way I ate, they would also put me in a cuckoo group. But that's the thing, is we all fall into our funny groups. And then in college, we have to work across those funny groups, which is, again, is a valuable skill. So that's the good of college. But they've not been teaching, realistic skills for a long period of time. So when you get done to college, you still have to train yourself anyway. And that's why employers don't care. So here's what I would want to show people. When I was on an interview, I would want to show that I have good English, or whatever the native language is in your land. And I want to show my proper grammar, because educated people typically know how to speak improperly. You can be educated without going to school. So I would make sure that I actually do that. So communication skills. What do we hope someone knows how to do out of school? We hope they know how to write. And we hope they know how to cite various references and use the correct references. Again, there's that. What did we hope would come out of universities? And what was different about universities then versus now? Universities used to present ideas to you across very different perspectives. One person thinks this way, the next person presents their argument this way, the next argument presents the person this way, the next person presents their argument this way. Now you've heard 4 different vantage points, because no matter where you're at, you could be right, the way you're looking at it based upon your experiences. Now you've heard everything, and then you make a decision for yourself. In today's world, they typically don't do that. You hear one side of a perspective. So what does that mean? Why do employers really care that you are able to get multiple different perspectives and integrate with them? Well, one, we're going to work in the real world with diverse people, which is a good thing, because they all think differently, which means they solve problems differently. You're going to have to work with people that think differently than you, because depending upon where they're at is going to be the way they think. And if they think the same way as you, there's no innovation or no problem solving. It's our differences that make us unique, especially on an innovation team. So you have to look like someone that's willing to get all the facts prior to making a decision, because that was what we used to come out of school. When you hear 5 or 10 different perspectives of the same thing, then you had to think about it and say, okay, perspective 1 was interesting. Perspective 2 is interesting. Well, I didn't understand it, but yeah, there's still some thinking there. And then I got the other ones and then I did it. So show that you get all the facts. So if you're in an interview and someone starts to ask a scenario and they haven't even finished the scenario, don't try to solve the problem. And if they give you something, don't solve it before you ask clarifying questions. So again, you're showing that you have that ability to go do it. Make sure your resume is good and clean. And generally speaking, the more assets you have, the better. So maybe you have the employer pay for the degree at some point. It could help you. Or maybe instead of it, for example, if you wanted to be a cloud network architect, maybe you do a CCDE and keep your architecture things and map it to a TOGAF. And by the end of the day, you've got the 2 biggest credentials that are out there, and that'll kind of swap it out as well. So there's lots of ways to get some elite badge on your resume, which is really what the certification is. And no, for the most part, it's not going to hold you back for normal jobs. Now, you'll get a solution architect job, a senior solution architect job, even a $400,000 principal architect job. You're good to go without the degrees. Now you want to become the chief information officer. You probably need a degree at that point. You want to be anything like that, you're typically going to need some form of a degree. But, is that even your goal?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Mike, you'll agree with me this one, but the impression that I'm getting as we've talked to so many people on the live streams and privately is a lot of people come from this notion of scarcity of jobs, scarcity of money, scarcity of all this. And the reality is you need to switch your perspectives on these things. Yeah. Many people, we tend to look at our obstacles as being unsurmountable and almost as excuses in regards to why we would be not good for something or perhaps potential failures. It's almost we're setting up ourselves for those failures. So when it comes to you, Foolish the Crow, do you have to overcompensate? Who told you to? Who told you that it's a hindrance? Is that even the job that you want to go for? Like Mike said, I have a college degree too. I've never had anyone ask me that before anything. Doesn't matter if it was full-time employment or if it was consultancy work. I've never had somebody ask, Mark, before you touch anything, we need to verify your college degree. Do you have one? Is it an associate's, is it a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD? Is it any of these things? Never. So look and shift your perspective on things. Make yourself valuable for the workplace. You can do that, as Mike mentioned, to the point where you can get these $500,000 jobs without having a college degree. Because in the end, there are benefits of college, but a lot of the training, a lot of the skills that you can learn from a college degree, they're available via books too. And actually at a much more affordable price. There's training programs like ours. People that don't have MBAs, they take our training program.
Yep.
And they get caught up with what they require to know to be competent in the job they're going to do. We cut out all the fluff. You don't have to worry about that. It's a focused training that's going to help you. So consider it from those perspectives. And I think the way you're going to start looking at things, your outlook, things that are possible are going to change tremendously. You're not going to feel anymore like somebody's holding you back, but rather you're going to look at how am I going to be grasping at all these opportunities that are potentially there for me to do. A great question, Foolish Crow. Very good question. Okay, let's go on to our next question from Shani. She's asking, I know you say you can focus on either the AWS solution architect or the Azure solution architect, but based on what you are seeing with your successful students and the current job market, is one being sought after more than the other?
No. So Shani, it doesn't matter. So employers know that at the end of the day, most people have certifications. They don't have the correct skills. But when you look at a bunch of resumes, what do? You pull people that have, you first look at people that have either got the right resume descriptions, and what does that mean? So for example, most of the resumes I look at look like fake resumes to me. How do I know it's a fake resume? Because the way the person's actually describing something, it's showing they don't actually understand what it is. So for example, I saw somebody say that they used the ITIL framework and increased availability to 99.999% availability. So the person, I saw it was a fake framework. Somehow the resume got to me, and it was time for me to interview them. And the first thing I did, I looked at that and said, could you explain to me how you achieved 5 nines availability? And what was it in that framework that enables you to do it? And he had no idea what went into availability, and the interview ended just like that. Now, if the resume bullet had said, design 5 nines available systems by using 2 clouds with 2 availability zones each, robust change control procedures, high availability network design, and went into 2 or 3 other things that would be there, I'd say, oh, okay. So there's that. There's usually, it's that. So employers don't really care which certification you have. So first they're looking for competency on your resume, and then they're looking for anything that can validate it. If it's experience, great. If it's a couple of certifications that make them think you're worth their time for an interview, great. Now, they know that if you pass, say, the AWS Solutions Architect Associate, there's maybe a 3% chance you can do the job. But if you pass the AWS Solutions Architect Professional or the Azure Solutions Architect Expert, maybe there's a 10% chance you have the skills to do the job. And if there's a 10% chance you could do the job, I'm going to interview you, or at least have somebody from my team. If it's less than 5%, or I think I'm not going to do it, because a lot of times people don't have the perfect resume, but you interview them and they're really great. So that's typically what'll happen. But no, it really doesn't matter. AWS or Azure, it's so irrelevant to absolute difference. Neither one of them has anything to do with cloud architecture. So there's a little more in the Azure than the AWS one. AWS is slightly a little bigger. Azure's growing real fast. Azure has more AI investment. AWS has more infrastructure. It just doesn't matter. I guess I would ask you, which car do you want to get certified in, Toyota or Honda? It's really the same thing.
Let me add something to this, Mike. So give Shani a little bit of an idea. You could go about and try to figure out how many people are certified, which is the most sought after. But I want you to do something, Shani. Actually, 2 things. Mike was giving an Azure bootcamp a few weeks ago. And that initial week of the bootcamp was to lay the foundation of what the technology is and how does it work. Yeah. It wasn't actually until the second week, and you can see this. Mike started off with saying, okay, now we got to go into the specifics of Azure and what they call it. So what am I trying to tell you with that? Within the training program, you'll notice the same thing. It's the general understanding of how things work with the cloud. Once we get into which platform or provider, you might even hear the term cloud service provider. Then what we're touching on is what services do they offer? And what are they? How do they roughly work? But the foundation is already laid. And that's what allows our students to pivot. If they see a job that they would like to do with a particular organization and they utilize, just so you know that most of them are going to have more than one cloud platform today. But let's say they specialize in using AWS because some engineer on their team said, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm used to. We got to go into cloud, right? The hype. Then what these students do, they have a great foundation. They know what a virtual machine is. They know what the different storage objectives that they have. They know how does networking work to a degree, right? We're not talking CCIE level, I think, but I was going to talk German, sorry. At least I was going to mindestens, at least at the CCNA level. Mike knows my pain. Sometimes words come out in different languages.
Understand. It happens to me too.
Yeah, and what they do then they focus on the specifics of that. So your focus should be rather on the overall. What is the technology that's being used so that the cloud providers can commoditize their services? And that's how we structure everything. So as you follow the program, you'll notice the same habits, the same pattern. You'll build up that foundation, and then you can pivot wherever you like. It doesn't matter if it's Google. It doesn't matter if it's AWS, Amazon. It doesn't matter if it's Microsoft. And to give you a little bit more of a secret, I know Mike is going to appreciate this and agree with this. Companies don't simply choose Amazon. They don't simply choose Microsoft or Google.
No.
Because one is hip over the other. There is a business objective attached to that. If they're more in the ecosystem on the Microsoft side, meaning they're bought into the Microsoft ecosystem, the tools available within the Microsoft cloud are going to be more conducive to being productive with what they need to accomplish. On the other end, if they're perhaps looking at more how services can be handled with databases and so forth, maybe AWS will be more conducive in helping them learn that particular objective or get to it. What about machine learning? What about compute? What about all these things? Maybe Google is better at that. Maybe that's what we want to go for analytics. And then here's the shocker. You'll find companies that use all three because they have a need for all three. And that's where the initial foundation that you're going to get through the program is going to set you up and get you trained properly so that you can pivot when the time comes for that. Question from Ben Smith. Hello, what are the most common knowledge or experience gaps that stop people from getting hired as a cloud architect?
Ben, it's never experience. And what I say this is because I've taken so many people and gotten them the first job as an architect. And if you watched earlier, I listed some names. My team can provide a list of some people. It's always knowledge. So the biggest problem I have is when someone comes in on an architect interview, they've trained to be an engineer. And here's what I mean. They've learned Linux, they've learned Kubernetes, they've learned Python, they have 10 million cloud projects, which are hands-on systems. And then when I ask them how to design anything, they have no idea. Oh, it's because, they're doing hands-on training. So the biggest three areas where people lack is network, data center, and cloud. And so I'm going to say network, data center, and security. So why do I say network? If you don't understand networking, and I mean really understand networking, and you can't lay out the pipeline for your multi-cloud architecture, and 98% of organizations are multi-cloud, meaning if you can't understand BGP and you can't understand the routing and you can't understand what type of WAN is chosen and why that type of WAN is chosen and how that traffic is destined to get through the system, everything will fall apart. If you don't understand how do you create an IP addressing plan, or at least work with a network architect or lead that network architect, and your addressing plan is wrong, your routing will go wrong and everything will come to a crash. Now, what do we do as architects? Well, 98% they're multi-cloud. So I need you to know what you can use in multi-cloud, which means if you got a certification, take the book that it was in, rip out 50% of the pages, because we can't use that stuff anymore. So I need you to know what you can't use. Which again is going to bring me back to my network and a data center. And the other side of it is not only will I have private clouds like Nutanix and OpenStack, which are in the data center. What if somebody asked me to move 15,000 virtual machines and 3 petabytes of data? Well, you have to understand the data center technology. What are you moving? Okay, this thing's got a bunch of, Xenon E3 2673 V3 CPUs. Well, these, that's a really old system. Do we want to use that system on the cloud? We've got 6 cores on this. What would it be the equivalent to do it on this other system on the cloud? What's going into these virtual machines? How are these virtual machines created? What type of container systems are they using? Why do we have this many container apps? How are the applications architected? Should they stay monolith? Should they go microservices? What do we lose when we go microservices? What problems will we have with microservices? What do we have with the monolith? So they think it is engineering, but they don't know the network. And then when it comes to security, they don't understand, where they need to put in next generation firewalls versus the cloud provider stuff. How do you create that defense in depth? How do you architect your security within a zero trust environment? What type of end-to-end encryption strategies do you need? Data at rest, storage at rest, movement on the network. What do you need and why do you need it? It's that type of, it's the planning knowledge. And because none of it's actually discussed in this. So it's what technology should I use? And then, Ben, the issue is that we architects don't configure technology. We've got to go to our client site and we have to learn their business processes. We have to be able to understand their business vision. We need to be able to work with them to modify their business processes. Then we need to know how to evaluate the technology platforms, which are networking and data center platforms, to figure out a plan to get them to the cloud, which is a virtual network in a data center. But if you don't know the network in the data center, you can't even think about moving it to the cloud. So it's really that issue. And then it's on the architect side, it's having the business acumen to understand a business, because you can't consult to a business without understanding business. It's knowing that you're going to be an architect and you're going to have to build a team of 15 to 50 people and lead that team for 6 to 12 months to design the architecture. So when I interview someone, do they look like a leader? And can they act like a leader? Now, do you have executive communication skills? Because you're going to go to a customer that's going to go spend $1 billion or a couple $100 million per year on cloud services. And you've got, the only way they're going to do it is if they get a business return. So you're going to have to speak to those executives, which means knowing what they care about, what they think about, how they communicate to them, get their business needs, then be able to not only take that technology solution, but with the sales executive, sell it back to them and show how it's going to impact their business. Again, it's business acumen. Then you're going to be giving presentations each day. In fact, the last part of a cloud architect interview, is generally speaking, is a presentation across like a board of people or 4 or 5 people. What are your presentation skills like? So that's really where people go wrong. I see it every day. I can see if I can look at 1,000 solution architect, cloud architect resumes, and I bring them in and I ask them basic architecture questions, they always want to go back to their engineering. And I say, but this is an architecture role. I've got a GitHub page. I'm like, well, I'm an architect. We're not going to, GitHub is not part of my job. But check out my GitHub page. And it's like, this is an executive position. We're not looking for Git or GitHub. In fact, the VP that's going to hire us probably doesn't even know what GitHub is. And I'm not joking in many cases. So, you know, it's all about who is hiring us. We are working for executives to consult to executives about their business. So, Ben, why don't you join? Well, one is get the free ebook on how to become a cloud architect and all the skills that you need to know. And that will explain, you know, the findings I've had after interviewing thousands of cloud people, thousands of them. And I've also interviewed about 6,000 people in my life. And I can tell you it's that. It's more the understanding of how the technology works and how it's integrated together and it's how it's mapped to a business process versus somebody wanting to come in and tell me about the different kinds of AWS S3. That's where it goes wrong. That's where the people typically fail. But I'll tell you, it's the best job ever. And it's one of those things that has a little bit of a barrier to entry, meaning the average person can't teach themselves how to be an architect. And by average, I mean like maybe 3% of the population could do it. And they all have IQs that are super high, because you have to be shown how the different pieces of the puzzle fit together. Kind of like a doctor needs to be taught this. Now, you can go to a Linux system and try to figure it out yourself. You can learn Linux administration yourself. You can learn cloud administration yourself. You can go play on the command line and learn engineering. What you can't do is learn how to fly a plane by yourself. Because you only got one time to take off, got to fly it, and then you got to land it. And you don't want to be trying to figure that out on the fly. You don't want to do surgery on a patient on the fly. You just don't. You want to learn how to do it first, hopefully. Maybe if you were shot in the field, you might be trying to pull out a bullet, but under normal circumstances, you would wait for a surgeon to do it. And, you know, you don't want to design an architecture to solve somebody's, you know, $80 billion business issues, your business, and put something in there and break the business. So that's the good news. You typically need to be taught architecture. And that means that you're not competing with anybody, because everybody else is too busy to try and get the right training to go learn what they need to know. And now they've got a whole bunch of people and they interview people and nobody knows, and then you're properly trained and you do well and you've got no competition. So, you know, when you compete with these bigger jobs, there's often no competition because most people aren't willing to do what it takes to actually get there. So I kind of always love that about architecture, network architecture, cloud architecture, security architecture. Everybody loves to get hands-on, and that's great. It's fun and exciting. I like it myself. But because this role is so much more about planning, and most people don't like planning, and most people don't want to learn planning, it's kind of nice because we have no competition on an interview for the most part.
Yeah, I think you agree, Mike. It's a very unique role, trying to marry what you could consider 2 different type of skill sets. One, and mindsets, let's be honest, it's different mindsets too, right? One comes from the technology mindset and some type of engineering too, because you have to learn the actual technology to a certain degree. And then the other one is, which a lot of technology professionals are adverse to, and that is this idea of, how do I show value of a product? How would I present it? How would I what would my sales pitch be like? Trying to convince the other person in taking on the solution that I'm providing them. So, Ben, those are things you do need to keep in mind. I think a lot of people, they go in with the wrong idea of the actual profession. So you can kind of categorize that under knowledge, but I think that's the biggest thing that I've also seen people just being kind of like, they feel like being hit by a truck because they thought it was basically, I'm going to go get geeky. And it's the furthest truth from that. You're not sitting there at a command line programming anything. I know that some vendors, they would prefer you do that, but what the gist really of that is that you're there to be a planner, a strategizer. You are there to map technology and the business together. You might have even heard the term digital transformation, which is part of that idea of mapping those two areas together. And most importantly, you're a trusted advisor too. Again, that buzzword, right, that we're bringing in, that you're unbiased in trying to solve a business problem. So if people could get clear on what the role actually is, I think that knowledge gap would shrink a lot. Experience would anyway come as you get the right training. I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of people think the only way to get experience is if they throw you onto the battlefield. That's not necessarily good for you either, but it's the actual training that has you practice these things so that you're ready when go time comes. But good question, Ben. If you have any more, feel free to ask. We'll be here to be able to elaborate a bit on that for you. In the meantime, let's go on to the next question. And that's going to be from SMWH. Do you have a basic breakdown on the AI architecture course?
Did you say course or just AI architecture?
He says AI architecture, but
so
I'm assuming unless
I don't want to make any assumptions. We'll go to the next question. Are you you're asking the question, are we going with a basic breakdown of AI architecture, or are you asking a basic breakdown of our AI development program like Mark is talking about? Let me go to Diego's and then I'll come right back to you because I don't want to assume.
Diego says, thank you for the precious content. I'm a network admin. For the boot camp, what knowledge is necessary to start?
Okay, Diego stuff. I don't exactly know which boot camp you're referring to. So if you're referring to our training programs for a cloud architect program, we assume you have zero knowledge when you start no matter what. And I'll tell you why I do it. And we're going to assume you have zero knowledge when you take our certified cloud security professional certification. And here's why I assume zero. Many people have lots of years of hands-on configuration, but when you interview them on an interview and you ask them how the technology works, they often don't know. They know the commands, they know how to configure it, but they typically don't know. So I assume everybody starts out at zero. And that why, even if somebody's got experience, it'll help them with that section. But I'm a networking person. That's why most of my life has been spent in networking, which means got a tremendous amount of experience in BGP, a tremendous amount of experience in OSPF and intermediate systems to intermediate systems, tremendous amount of experience in QoS, tremendous amount of experience in MPLS and MPLS traffic engineering and creation of internet service provider networks, and even designing high availability systems for banks. So that's my background. But, that didn't include wireless networks, for example. And the point is, if I were to do it now and I wasn't going to be an expert architect in that, I'd have to learn wireless. So I'd still have to learn wireless. Do you know what I never learned? I never learned anything about application architecture in my network architecture days because it wasn't what we were focused on. We were focused on different things. So no matter where you come from, we all have to learn. You get someone from a software development background and you know what they don't know? Typically speaking, infrastructure. They know all about applications and APIs, and it's really cool stuff, but they don't understand the infrastructure. And that's okay too. And then you get somebody from a data perspective, and you know what they get? Data as potentially APIs. So by doing that, we never really get the full picture of everything. So that's why I start everyone at ground zero. So if it's our training, it's at ground zero in any situation. So no, come and join any of our training that you want. Now, if you're asking about our main program, it's not a boot camp. A boot camp means you come in and you come out in 16 weeks, whether you're ready for a job, hireable or done. You know, when people train in our programs, they've got unlimited time in our program and they stay in until they're completely hired. In the main part, the offline parts of the program, they can stay in forever. So there is that. And we never take the people's content away from them. And sometimes I get somebody hired and they still come back to class because they like to share their experiences with somebody else. We kind of like that too, because they get hired and they bring some other people with them. But, you know, for us, you know, when you train with us, with the exception of the live classes and the lab time, the rest of the main training program, which is like almost 900 hours, is when until you're hired. So hope that kind of helps. And in our free training, it'll be the same thing. We'll present for 20 minutes. We'll answer 10 minutes of questions. We'll do this for the 2 weeks through. It'll be completely free, and we assume you know nothing, and we're going to start from the fundamentals because we want everybody to be great at the end of anything we do.
All right. It looks like everybody is satisfied with their questions. Oh, we got to respond.
Okay.
They're talking about general AI architecture.
Okay. Glad we clarified it. So you actually just asked one of the most dangerous questions in the entire world. So McKinsey estimates that 70% of architectures are complete disasters. And David Lithica mentioned another very valuable study, which listed it as almost 80% of architectures that are failing. And why did you just ask what I consider the most dangerous question in architecture? What you really just asked me is, what's the best pill that a doctor should use? Could you tell me what goes into the medication that a doctor selects? And why do I say this? Well, when we look at an AI architecture, we look at what are we trying to achieve? Do we need an LLM? Should we use a small language architecture? Should we use agentic AI? What kind of data do we have right now? What do we need to do with that data to get it there? What kind of calculations are going to be necessary to run our model? Should I run it on a CPU? Should I run it on a GPU? Can it be run on an FPGA or an ASIC? What kind of performance do I need from that compute perspective? Is it something that can be done on an ARM processor more inexpensively, for example? Where are my data sources? What kind of adversarial system do I kind of need? What am I trying to achieve? And if a doctor has a patient with a bronchitis, they give one treatment. If they have a heart attack, they use a completely different treatment. If somebody has arthritis, they use a completely different treatment. And if we just want to go look at architecture and say, what's it supposed to look like? We've already solved the problem without knowing what it actually is. So that's why it takes 6 to 12 months to figure out what our architecture is going to look like. It's not going to be just use this AWS Bedrock plug into this thing. And if you do, you know what's going to happen? You're going to give your customer the same solution that the next 10 million people do, and it's going to be optimized for maybe a McDonald's use case, and you need to run a hospital on it, and it's not going to be there. So, and I'm not saying about any cloud service being good or bad. The cloud service is great. It's where are we applying the technology? Are we applying it correctly? What problem are we trying to solve? What are we working with? What do we have to get to before we can get there? Do we need to make any modifications on our data, on our compute, on our storage, on our network? Where's our data coming from? What kind of latency can we tolerate? All of that needs to be thought about. And the ultimate goal is long before we get to any architecture. Because we can't create the map until we know the destination. And an architecture is just a map. I hope that works. And I hope that makes sense. But that's why we have so many challenges in architecture. Because we have to be business driven first. Now, I can see why a lot of projects are tech driven. Because a lot of projects were driven by engineers, and engineers love tech. How much do I know this? If you come to my house, it's a little sick. I've got a full enterprise grade Cisco 10 gigabit wired network throughout my house. I've got a 10 server OpenStack cloud. I got a VMware cloud that's doing some other stuff. I've got a whole bunch of systems with a 0.5 terabyte of DRAM doing all kinds of calculations with multiple CPUs in it. And I'm not joking because I still like to play. I love tech. But you know, that's for me, it's my hobby, it's my innovation land. It makes me think about it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I have an idea what I can use this tech for. But that's not the way business should be done. That's my personal hobby, my personal money, which my wife just says, I just buy whatever toys you want. I bought my 1,500 pairs of shoes last month, and I'm slightly exaggerating, but not that much. Go what you want. So it's that. But for a business need, we need to know what problem we're solving. I hope that makes sense.
And you guys see me laughing because I know, Mike, we love that. When we open that box, we get that new smell of the tech. It just awakens the geek in us wanting to play around with it. It's funny how we make up reasons as to we need that right now. And then when we get it, it goes like, okay, what can I do all with it? The reasons weren't pre-existing. But yeah, you make a good point. And I think that's why I know somebody in the chat said 70% of architecture fails, especially when we think of cloud and so forth, is that people look for excuses to use these technologies. I mean, we see that kind of trend going on with the generative AI and with artificial intelligence, where some companies have an idea of how they're going to make their business more efficient, and others are trying to jump on the bandwagon, but they have no use case for the technology. And then they wonder why it fails, why they're going under, why people leaving, why they have to fire people. So if you want to get into the field of IT in general, it's always good to keep the perspective of the business around. What is the business? What can it do with that? Otherwise, if you go any other way, we're just going to be another statistics on the page as to why an architecture failed, why the design failed, and we're going to blame technology for it, even though the technology wasn't at fault. It was our mistake for making up reasons for using something when it was not necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe, Mike, that is all we have, and I would also like to keep you on schedule for your next appointment coming up as well. But do you have any closing remarks?
For a change. So yeah, so the key here, a couple things to remember, and I got some free stuff to finalize or make sure everybody knows about. Make sure all of you know that there's nothing you can't do. Nothing. In fact, after 20 years of coaching people to do things they never believed was possible, I can tell you there's nothing that's impossible. And I will tell you most people's biggest limitations are themselves. Fear gets in the way, and it totally gets in the way. And when fear gets in the way, everything changes. What we can achieve is amazing. Tony, Scrum Master has nothing to do with architecture whatsoever. It's not an advantage by any stretch of the imagination. Architecture experience is designed by your ability to solve a customer's problems. And, I want you to all think about that. It's not what you used to do. I used to practice internal medicine. And Tony, practicing internal medicine is more like architecture than Scrum. And it doesn't matter. You can do it. And why do I say this? Here's what we do in medicine. Somebody comes in with a problem. We ask some questions about the problem. We make a diagnosis and we make a plan. Architecture is asking someone about their goals, pain points, and problems, asking some questions, assessing their systems, making a diagnosis and a plan. That's architecture. Scrum, which is more related to something else, is a great experience. And I'm sure you've corralled people, and I'm sure there's a tremendous number of experience factors that you've already had, which is great. You will also understand Scrum and some more things related to software, and that's all wonderful. But you still need to learn architecture. And architecture is about solving business problems. But every piece of experience you had in your life is valuable. It's all valuable. The key is taking the lessons from it. Sales is an extremely good background for architects. In fact, I've trained so many sales reps, and people ask, who's the fastest people I can get hired? It's a sales rep and it's a medical professional. It just seems to be that way because there's so much communication in our role. But the point is, it's all good. And you can do it, Tony. Don't let anything stop you. But worry less about your background and what you can do, and worry more about what you want to do. I mean, Daniel Bosu dropped out of high school before JP Morgan Chase trained him as an architect. Delray Batt worked on ambulances before we got him his first cloud security architect. Well, I got him a cloud security engineer job, and then he finished our training and got a cloud security architect job at CDW. But it just doesn't matter where you come from. My first job was a senior engineer, and what I did the day before that was I saw patients in my internal medicine office. So you can do it. And for all of you, remember, you can do anything that you set your mind to as long as you build the right plan, obtain the critical skills and knowledge for your career, and go out there and show the world what you can do for them. So there's that. So if you want to learn how to become an AI architect, and honestly, if you come join this AI architecture webinar that David Lithicum and I'm running, he was Deloitte's head of cloud strategy, which means chief cloud architect. He's got about 35 years architect experience, especially in AI. I've got about a little more than 25 years of experience, mostly in enterprise architecture, network architecture, and business architecture. Tomorrow, we're going to hold a webinar on how to become an AI architect, and it's going to be free. Well, David and I will just speak for about 45 minutes. We'll answer any career question you have about AI architect careers, cloud architect careers, security architect careers. We don't care. We just want to help you, and it's all free. So join us tomorrow. Join us on the completely free CCSP Bootcamp program. Mark and I are going to get a little geeky for 2 weeks and talk about cybersecurity, specifically as it's related to cloud, all the considerations of the cloud, and it is going to be fun. Every once in a while, I get to get geeky, and I get to get pretty geeky, Mark and I, on this, so it's going to be fun. And it's going to be 2 weeks. It's going to be completely free. It'll be legitimate training, taught by two people that not only know it, but you'll be able to ask questions, and we're going to make sure you have a great experience, and it's all free. So sign up. And why don't you sign up, for those of you that desire cloud architect roles, for that free ebook on how to become a cloud architect or an AI architect. And there might even be some documents and descriptions in the video about how to pass an interview, cloud architect interview questions, lots of free things in the video, in the description of the video. So go get some. If you haven't, give the video a like. Please give it a like, subscribe, hit the bell, that kind of YouTube thing. And hope to see you soon.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. And we definitely do look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and especially next week again. We'll have another session of the Q&A, and hopefully you come up with some more fantastic questions. Thank you.